Hello, everybody. So, today we are going to talk about artificial intelligence and machine learning for business. What we are going to learn is how to use these new ideas and technologies to improve the overall efficiency of a business. Now, since we are going to talk about artificial intelligence, it's a good idea to understand what exactly intelligence means. And for the same purpose, going to take an example. Now, what you're seeing on your screen is a chocolate cake. And when you're looking at this chocolate cake, which looks quite delicious, you must be thinking of eating some. And let me try to bring in another scenario on top of. Let's assume that you have just had your dinner and you're full. In that situation, you're also going to think about not eating this chocolate cake because it's going to go against your dietary regime or it's going to create a conflict within you. The conflict is whether to eat this cake or not to eat this cake. And that's where intelligence comes into picture. So there is a conflict. There are two conflicting ideas within your brain, and intelligence try to resolve this conflict between these conflicting ideas. Now, one of the good questions to ask at this point is where is this conflict coming from? Now, to understand how these conflicting set of ideas are being generated within the brain and where this conflict is coming from, let's travel back in time and let's see how the brain has evolved on an evolutionary scale. Now, what you're seeing on your screen is a fish, and this is the phenomena which is described in this book called Incognito by David Eagleman. Now, this is a very interesting book about neuroscience, brain, and evolution. And what is important is that while we are talking about artificial intelligence, it's good to look at how the intelligence has evolved for the biological creature. So again, coming back to this fish, which is essentially a stickleback fish, uh, and there is a very interesting thing that goes inside the brain of a stickleback fish when a female stickleback approaches. So male stickleback fish handles that situation in a very interesting way. Now, in terms of evolution, there are two very important ideas for any creature to survive. The first idea is to reproduce. So when you see a opposite sex, you try to woo them, display courtship behavior. The reason for that is that you want to propagate your own species. That's the underlying idea. The second idea, which is equally important from the evolutionary point of view, is to protect yourself. And that's where you create a territory. You say, this is my territory, and I'm going to protect this territory because it's important for me to protect myself. Now, when a stickleback fish sees a male stickleback fish sees a female stickleback fish, there are these two ideas that gets ignited at the same time. The first idea is to display courtship because you want to reproduce, you want to mate. And the second idea is to protect your territory. So you become hostile to the person or the creature that is entering your territory. So the male stickleback fish displays both these conflicting ideas at the same time. Now, the interesting part over here is that the stickleback does not have evolved intelligence on top of it to resolve this conflict between two zombie program, and that's what David Eagleman called these ideas in his book. And he, like this male stickleback, has absolutely no idea to how to resolve this conflict. So it displays both courtship as well as hostility at the same time when a female stickleback approaches her. Now, the kind of conflict that we saw for stickleback fish exists within an organization as well. What you're seeing over here is an example from banking where there are two departments, credit risk and sales. Usually, these departments have very different objectives and very different goals. And because of that, credit risk tries to, or rather, sales tries to woo the customer in the same way as the stickleback was doing while mating. So it's trying to bring more customers to the bank, and credit risk is displaying a similar territorial behavior which is to stop the customers from entering. So essentially, credit risk is saying that not all customers are invited to the bank. We are only going to take customers who are low risk in terms of their repayment behavior. So people who are going to pay back their loans are the ones that we want to select. And the customers who are high risk, we're not going to take them in the bank. And this is the conflict that exists between these two departments. And one of the ways that organizations try to resolve this conflict is having a leadership with a very specific strategy based on the business goals. And that's what the whole idea of intelligence is. And Eagleman also calls this leadership on top as the intelligence or the conscious brain that a human mind has. So, this is possibly a good time to look at this entire conflict and conflicting ideas within a brain and within an organization from a data science perspective, because that is what our focus is going to be during this entire video series. So what you're seeing on your screen is a typical life cycle of a borrower within a bank. So we are taking from the same example of credit and sales, which we discussed in the last slide. What you're seeing is there are different models. These are different models that one builds using data science within a bank. And if you see the first two models, the first one is a prospect score, which is kind of like the sales team. What the prospect score is doing is within a targetable market, that is essentially the entire planet, you're trying to identify who is possibly the best prospect for you to sell your loan product. Now, let's assume you're trying to sell a housing loan. And in that case, who is the right profile for you to target so that you increase your chances of selling your housing loan? Now, right after this prospect score is the second step, which is essentially governed by the credit department. And this is called application scoring or credit scoring, where a prospect is now being evaluated on the scale of risk. Now, the credit scoring is trying to understand what is the overall chances that the borrower is going to pay back to the bank, and what are the chances or the probability of default for a particular applicant. Now, essentially, if you see the first model and second model, like credit and sales in the previous example, can create a conflicting scenario. And that's when you think of artificial intelligence, think of it like a holistic intelligence on top of all these models to resolve such conflict. Now, when I say models, think of it like this, that prospect model on its own is a really powerful model, similar to the model within the brain of a fish that we saw. And this model essentially represents the mating or the need that for a fish to propagate. The second model, which is the credit scoring model, is kind of like the territorial model where the fish is trying to be hostile. So on their own, both these models are extremely powerful and extremely good at what they do. However, usage of these models depend on the exterior situation, what is going on in the external environment, and basis that you want to increase or decrease the overall power of these models, and which is what the idea with artificial intelligence is, that it will be sitting on top of all these zombie programs or zombie models and try to see based on interact with the external environment and basis that control these models. At this point, we are not there in terms of artificial intelligence. So that's where what we do is we create our own logic and we create your own business logic basis which these models can increase or decrease in terms of their intensity basis the scenario outside. So for now, what you will see is like we are currently going through a pandemic, COVID-19, where we will see quite a few defaults because people overall earning capacity of people will decrease, and that's what the assumption is, and that's where you want the credit to be much more stringent going forward, at least for some time, and make the sales model a little bit less. On the other hand, if the economy is booming, you want to kind of change the strategy and bring the sales model much more wide, or increase the intensity of sales model or propensity score or prospect score in this case, and reduce the threshold a little bit for credit. I mean, these are the things that you try. There's no hard and fast rule. These are the things which you do by interacting with the external environment, how the economy is doing. And the idea is that in some time, maybe in future, an artificial intelligence will take care of all this by interacting with the external environment. So that's one of the definition I will say for artificial intelligence. And in the next lectures, we are also going to see few more definitions which could be there for artificial intelligence. So just to summarize, within our brain or within data science or within an organization, there exist these conflicting ideas. For example, in data science, it could be prospecting score and application score. Within an organization, it's sales and credit, and within our brain, the tendency to mate and territorial behavior. Now, these zombie programs or individual models are really good at what they do. So, sales is really good at selling. Credit risk is really good at evaluating risk. And the way intelligence or artificial intelligence fit into this entire picture is by making these zombie programs interact with each other and make the right decision based on the environment or the external circumstances. So that's essentially, I'm saying, is one of the definition that I want to propose for artificial intelligence, something that can be used to resolve conflict that can exist between these zombie programs because they all have different objectives and goals. So we are going to meet in the next lecture series to continue this idea. Thanks.